It was quiet out there, in the vast emptiness beyond Neptune. The stars shone cold and distant, and the blackness of space stretched farther than anyone could imagine. For most of humanity, space was still just a picture on a screen, a mystery, something beautiful but unreachable. But for the crew aboard the Odyssey, it was real. Every second of the long journey felt alive with possibility and danger, though at the moment, all that existed was the silence of the void. The Odyssey was small, built for exploration and diplomacy, not war. Its hull gleamed faintly in the dim light of distant stars, and inside, everything was a delicate balance of technology and human effort. People moved through the corridors carefully, checking instruments, scanning communications, and making sure every system worked perfectly. The ship was carrying the hopes of all humanity. For the first time, humans were about to meet another intelligent species. It was thrilling. It was terrifying. And it was almost unimaginable. Deep inside the command room, the captain stood at the central console, looking at the screens in front of him. The lights reflected in his eyes as he traced the strange signals that had led them here. The signals were faint, almost like whispers from the dark, but they were too precise to be random. Someone or something was out there, someone intelligent. The crew was tense but excited. They had trained for this moment for years, imagining what first contact might be like. But nothing could have prepared them for the feeling of actually being close enough to see it, even through the ship's sensors. The signals originated from a structure that was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. It wasn't like a spaceship or a station, at least not in the way humans understood. It shimmered, almost as if it were alive, glowing faintly in colors that the human eye could barely detect. Waves of energy seemed to flow over it, moving and pulsing, responding to the ship's sensors as though it could feel them. At first, the crew thought it might be some kind of natural phenomenon. But the patterns in the signals were too deliberate. There was intelligence behind it, and that realization made every heartbeat sharper. The ship's communications officer was already trying to decipher the signals, writing down sequences of pulses and lights, comparing them with Earth's mathematical codes. Slowly, patterns began to appear. The captain took a deep breath. "Prepare for a closer approach," he said. His voice was steady, but inside, he felt the weight of history pressing down on him. "Keep all systems ready, and no sudden movements. We're here to observe and communicate, not provoke." The Odyssey moved forward, gliding silently through the dark. As it approached, the alien structure seemed to respond. Pulses of light traveled along its surface in rhythm with the ship's own scans, almost like it was greeting them. The crew held their breath. No one spoke for a long time. Communication with another species, intelligent and alive, was a strange thing. Words could not describe it because the words did not exist yet. Hours passed as the ship remained near the structure, careful not to disturb it. The communications officer worked tirelessly, trying different combinations of mathematical symbols and tones. Sometimes the pulses from the alien structure seemed to match the sequences they sent, almost like the aliens were trying to understand. And in that moment, the crew realized something incredible. The aliens were not hostile. They were curious. The first exchange was simple. It was basic mathematics, a language both sides could recognize. A pattern of lights from the structure matched a sequence sent by the Odyssey. It was a dialogue, slow and cautious, but it worked. For the first time, humans were not just observing the universe. They were part of it. They were speaking with another form of life, another intelligence. Celebration was quiet aboard the ship, because excitement was tempered by fear. Everyone knew the stakes. One wrong move, one misinterpretation, and first contact could turn into disaster. Still, there was joy. For the first time, humans realized that the universe was not silent. There were others out there, and they were willing to communicate. On Earth, news of the discovery sent waves of excitement and hope. People watched broadcasts from the Odyssey, following the careful steps of the crew. Scientists debated what the signals could mean. Philosophers and writers speculated about the nature of these beings. Children imagined aliens waving through space like neighbors across the street. For once, humanity seemed united in wonder instead of fear, but not everyone shared the same calm. Deep within the United Earth Space Authority, military officials were uneasy. They studied the data from the ship and the signals from the structure with suspicion. The aliens' technology was unlike anything humans had ever encountered. Ships that could shimmer and vanish from sensors. Energy waves that seemed to bend space. The possibilities frightened them. What if these beings were not friendly? What if humans were not ready to meet them? The captain of the Odyssey had received orders from Earth: maintain peace, gather information, and avoid any aggressive action. But he also knew the humans back home were watching closely, hoping for answers, while preparing for the worst. The crew continued their careful work, but every scan revealed something new, something beautiful, and something unsettling. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, the aliens, who came to be known as the Virelans, revealed more about themselves. They were curious about humans, asking questions in their own way, through light, sound, and energy patterns. The crew responded carefully, sharing information about Earth, about life, about their hopes. Each interaction was painstakingly slow, but it was meaningful. For the humans aboard the Odyssey, it was a profound lesson in patience. Communication was not instant. It required observation, reflection, and respect. There were moments of frustration when the crew could not understand the patterns or when the aliens' responses seemed confusing. But there were also moments of awe, when a flash of light or a tone of sound revealed something beautiful and intelligent, something that no human could have imagined. One evening, the captain stood alone in the observation deck, staring out at the shimmering alien structure. It pulsed softly, a living star in the darkness. He thought about the thousands of people back on Earth hoping for news, wondering what the aliens looked like, what they thought, what they felt. And he realized that in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that humans had taken the first step into the larger universe, not with weapons, not with fear, but with curiosity and courage. The Odyssey crew continued their work, day after day, careful, precise, respectful. Every action was measured, every communication was considered, and slowly humanity began to understand something extraordinary. First contact was possible. Peace was possible. Not because humans had the power to enforce it, but because they were willing to reach out with an open mind and an open heart. But even as hope spread, subtle tensions remained. Some members of the crew wondered what the aliens were hiding. Others feared that Earth was not ready for such a profound encounter. And deep in the shadows of the United Earth Space Authority, plans were being made. Plans for protection, plans for defense, plans for something that might not yet be needed, but could one day change everything. Yet for now, in the quiet depths beyond Neptune, the Odyssey and its crew moved with care and wonder. They were explorers, not soldiers. They were observers, not conquerors. And in that fragile silence, something miraculous was happening. Humanity had finally taken its first true step into the cosmos, not alone, but alongside beings from another world who had chosen to meet them with curiosity instead of hostility. And as the stars stretched endlessly around them, the crew understood, perhaps for the first time, that peace in the universe might be more delicate than anything they had imagined. But it was also more precious. Every pulse of light, every tiny signal, every careful exchange carried the weight of hope. And that hope, fragile as it was, glimmered brighter than any star. The days aboard the Odyssey flowed slowly but steadily, each one filled with careful observation and cautious communication. The alien structure, now recognized as the home of the Virelans, was unlike anything humans had ever encountered. It shimmered and pulsed in patterns that seemed almost musical, like light and energy dancing together in perfect harmony. Every day the crew discovered something new, a wave of energy that bent around them, or a pattern that seemed to respond specifically to their actions. It was as if the Virelans were studying the humans as much as the humans were studying them. The crew quickly realized that patience was the key. The Virelans did not rush or force interaction. Their responses came in long pauses, thoughtful and deliberate, giving the impression that they were weighing every action before reacting. The human crew tried to match this rhythm. Every sequence of lights or sounds sent from the Odyssey was carefully measured, repeated, and analyzed. A misstep could confuse the aliens or worse, make them wary. Back on Earth, the world followed every update from the Odyssey. News outlets broadcasted live feeds from the ship's communication systems, translating the pulses of light and energy into animations and simple explanations for the public. People across the globe watched in awe as scientists slowly decoded the alien language. Schools organized lessons about the virulence, and families gathered around screens to see the first exchange of ideas between humans and another intelligent species. The excitement was overwhelming, a reminder of the potential greatness of humanity when focused on curiosity instead of conflict. On board the Odyssey, the crew worked tirelessly to understand more about the virulence technology. At first, they had assumed that the shimmering energy waves were purely decorative, like some kind of display. But they soon realized that the waves were functional, interacting with the ship's sensors and even affecting gravity slightly. It was a subtle effect, barely noticeable, but it hinted at technology far beyond what humans had achieved. Some crew members were fascinated by the possibilities, imagining new ways to travel or communicate. Others were more cautious, aware that power like this could be dangerous if misunderstood or misused. The captain held daily briefings trying to keep morale high while maintaining discipline. He reminded the crew that their mission was not to conquer or control but to learn and understand. "Our job," he said, "is to show humanity at its best, patient, curious, and careful. We are representing everyone back home. One wrong move could undo everything." His words resonated with the crew, who had all trained for situations where fear might tempt them to act impulsively. They knew that this mission was bigger than any single person, bigger than any one ship. Despite the calm on the ship, small tensions began to emerge. Some crew members wondered why the virulence seemed so cautious. Were they hiding something? Did they have technology that could threaten Earth? And why had they chosen to make contact now, after so many years of silence in the galaxy? These questions were difficult to answer, and they created quiet debates during off-duty hours. Crew members spoke softly in the mess hall, sharing fears and theories, trying to understand what it meant to meet beings so far beyond their understanding. At the same time, Earth's military leaders watched the situation with growing concern. The virulence abilities seemed almost magical. Ships that could bend light and appear invisible, energy fields that could manipulate gravity, and pulses that could affect technology without touching it. All of these things made humans uneasy. While the scientists and diplomats celebrated, some generals quietly argued for a stronger presence near the alien structure. They feared that curiosity alone might not be enough to protect Earth if the virulence intentions changed. To address these concerns, the United Earth Space Authority began secret planning. They had authorized a Dreadnought-class ship, the Helios Vanguard, to move into a stealth orbit near the virulence structure. Its presence was classified, hidden from the Odyssey crew and the public. The generals claimed it was precautionary, a measure to protect Earth if diplomacy failed. But for the people on the Odyssey, unaware of this development, the mission remained focused entirely on understanding and peace. Meanwhile, aboard the Odyssey, the crew continued their attempts at deeper communication. Using light sequences combined with mathematical patterns, they began exploring concepts such as basic physics, gravity, and energy. Each small breakthrough thrilled the humans. They had managed to convey the concept of motion, and the virulence responded with sequences that seemed to describe their own methods of travel. It was a slow but beautiful exchange, like two cultures learning to sing together for the first time. One crew member, the lead scientist, discovered that the virulence seemed to respond differently depending on the ship's movement. When the Odyssey rotated gently or adjusted its position slightly, pulses of light became more regular, almost like the aliens were adjusting to their rhythm. It was subtle, but it suggested that the Virulans could perceive and react to motion in ways humans had never considered. This discovery sparked debates among the crew about what other senses the aliens might have. Could they perceive emotions? Could they detect intentions? The questions only added to the wonder and tension. The Virulans' responses were not always easy to interpret. Some signals seemed joyful, some puzzled, and others appeared cautious. The humans had to rely on patience and observation to understand the meaning behind each pulse. Misinterpretation could lead to confusion, and confusion could create fear. But through trial and error, patterns began to emerge. The crew learned to recognize the Virulans' rhythms and moods, and in turn, the Virulans seemed to adjust to the humans' own sequences. Even with progress, fear lingered. The crew knew that they were dealing with beings whose technology far surpassed their own. They were like children learning to interact with a force that could destroy or protect them effortlessly. That knowledge kept them humble. It also reminded them that first contact was not only about understanding but about respect. Every step had to be taken with care, every message sent with thoughtfulness. Life aboard the Odyssey was not all work and observation. The crew shared meals, told stories of Earth, and sometimes stared quietly out the observation windows at the endless black dotted with distant suns. They spoke of families, friends, and the hopes that humanity had pinned on this mission. These moments of personal connection reminded them why they were there. They were not just scientists or explorers. They were representatives of a species, reaching out for friendship, understanding, and knowledge. Slowly, a fragile trust began to form. The Virulans' pulses became more consistent, responding to greetings and patterns sent by the humans. It was still cautious, still deliberate, but it was there. The crew felt a sense of relief, realizing that the beings they had feared might be dangerous were instead willing to engage peacefully. It was a moment that could have changed history, a demonstration that two species from entirely different worlds could communicate without conflict. Yet even as hope spread among the humans, subtle signs of concern remained. Some energy patterns from the Virulans were difficult to interpret, and some responses were delayed or unexpected. The captain reminded the crew that these moments were normal. Differences in perception, speed, and thought could create confusion. Patience was required, and mistakes had to be handled carefully. As the weeks went by, the Odyssey crew became more attuned to the rhythms of the Virulans. They learned when to pause, when to repeat messages, and how to observe responses without imposing their own interpretations. They realized that communication was not simply about exchanging information, but about understanding a completely different way of perceiving the universe. Every day was a lesson in humility and curiosity. And still, on Earth, the excitement and hope continued. People imagined a future where humans and Virulans might meet face-to-face, share knowledge, and explore the universe together. But behind the scenes, decisions were being made that would eventually test that fragile trust. Military planners debated how to protect Earth. Scientists speculated on the implications of the technology, and politicians worried about the reactions of the public. On the Odyssey, none of that mattered, not yet. The crew focused on the present, on each pulse, each sequence, each careful exchange that could build understanding. For now, humanity had taken its first real steps into a wider universe, not with weapons or conquest, but with patience, curiosity, and hope. As the ship floated silently near the shimmering Virulan structure, a sense of calm settled over the crew. It was a calm built not on certainty, but on wonder. They were witnesses to something extraordinary, something that reminded them why humans had always looked up at the stars and dreamed. And for the first time, they realized that meeting another species might not just be a moment in history. It might be a turning point for the very nature of humanity itself. The Virulans pulsed gently in response to a light sequence sent by the Odyssey, almost as if acknowledging the humans' presence. The crew watched in awe, hearts swelling with hope. For a brief moment, the universe felt smaller, less lonely, and full of possibility. They had crossed the threshold into the unknown, and though challenges surely lay ahead, they had done it with grace, respect. The calm that had settled around the Odyssey and the Virilan structure began to feel fragile, though the crew didn't realize it at first. Weeks of careful communication and observation had created a rhythm, a pattern that made the universe feel a little more understandable. The crew had learned to anticipate the Virilan's responses, to read the pulses and lights as if they were messages written in an unfamiliar but beautiful language. But even in this fragile harmony, small anomalies began to appear. Subtle shifts that unsettled the humans aboard the ship. It started with a flicker, barely noticeable in the structure's light patterns. The pulses would change suddenly, just for a moment, as if something had disturbed the flow. The crew initially thought it was a natural variation, like the way a heartbeat sometimes skips unexpectedly. But then the fluctuations became more frequent, and the patterns they had come to understand seemed to respond differently to their own signals. The lead scientist frowned at the console, analyzing the data. "It's not random," they said quietly. "The Virilans are reacting to something. Or someone." The captain called an emergency meeting in the control room. The crew gathered around the central display, faces illuminated by the soft glow of the screens. They went over the logs, comparing the recent signals to the earlier patterns. Every anomaly was carefully marked and noted. Some crew members felt a rising tension in their chests, a sense that the peace they had grown used to might be more delicate than anyone had imagined. The communications officer worked tirelessly, trying to understand what the Virilans were signaling. Using combinations of mathematical sequences, sound waves and light pulses, they attempted to re-establish the earlier rhythm. At first, the structure seemed to respond normally, but then, almost immediately, there was a sudden burst of energy. It wasn't directed at the ship, and nothing was damaged, but every system on board flickered and momentarily went offline. Screens went dark, lights dimmed, and alarms rang softly before systems rebooted automatically. The crew froze for a moment, hearts pounding. None of them had been hurt, but the experience left them shaken. The captain took a deep breath and looked at the team. "Status report," he said calmly, though the tension in his voice betrayed him. "We need to understand what just happened and why." The science officer leaned forward, scanning the logs. "It's not an attack," they said. "The Virilans didn't target us directly, but the energy burst, whatever it was, interacted with our systems. I think it was a misalignment or maybe a defensive reaction, something we triggered without realizing it." The idea that they might have caused an unintentional reaction weighed heavily on everyone. For the first time, the crew realized that first contact was not only about curiosity and understanding, but also about caution. Even a small mistake could have consequences they couldn't foresee. The very act of observing, of existing in the Virilan space, might be enough to provoke a response. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the incident triggered quiet concern within the United Earth Space Authority. Military leaders and policymakers began to argue in hushed tones about the potential dangers of the mission. While the public still celebrated peaceful contact, secret memos warned that the situation could turn dangerous if humans misjudged the Virilan's intentions or if communication failed. It was a delicate balance. They wanted to protect Earth without appearing aggressive or undermining the mission. Orders were quietly issued to prepare the Helios Vanguard, a Dreadnought-class ship designed for defense, to move closer to the Virilan structure. Its stealth systems were state-of-the-art, capable of remaining undetectable to the Virilan's sensors. The generals described it as precautionary, a safety net in case diplomacy failed. But even this decision added a layer of tension. If the Virilans somehow discovered the Dreadnought, it could shatter the fragile trust the humans had built. Aboard the Odyssey, the crew noticed subtle changes in the Virilans' behavior after the energy burst. The pulses of light and sound were slower, more deliberate, almost cautious. The aliens seemed to be observing more carefully, perhaps reconsidering the intentions of the humans nearby. The communications officer worked harder, sending repeated sequences in an attempt to reassure the Virilans. The rhythm slowly returned, but it was not quite the same as before. One crew member, who had been studying the structure's energy patterns in detail, pointed out something unusual. "Look here," they said, highlighting a series of pulses that seemed almost like warning signals. They're not aggressive, but they're different. They're defensive. Something we did triggered this response, and I think we need to be extra careful from now on. The captain nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. Everyone, he said. We've learned a lot in these weeks. But this is a reminder. We are visitors in their space. Everything we do matters. We cannot assume we understand them completely. Observation, patience, and respect are more important than ever. Despite the growing tension, life aboard the Odyssey continued. Crew members carried out their daily routines, monitoring the structure, recording data, and attempting to communicate. But the sense of vulnerability was always there, like a shadow at the edge of their vision. Each crew member was acutely aware that a single misstep could change everything. The incident also sparked deeper reflection among the crew. They had entered the void beyond Neptune full of excitement and curiosity, expecting wonder and discovery. But now, they realized that contact with an advanced species was not only about knowledge, but also about humility. They were encountering beings who had existed long before humans, and whose understanding of the universe far surpassed their own. Every pulse, every shift of light, every energy fluctuation was a reminder of their limitations. At the same time, the crew grew more attuned to the Virilan's subtle signals. They began noticing patterns in the pauses, the timing, the intensity of the pulses. Small changes became meaningful, hints about the alien's mood and attention. Understanding these subtleties required patience, careful observation, and empathy, qualities that the crew had learned to rely on more than technology. It was a slow, deliberate process, but one that brought them closer to real understanding. Still, the humans could not ignore the broader context. Earth was watching. Military. Planners were preparing contingencies. Scientists were speculating about the possibilities and risks. The crew realized that their mission was not only about communication with the Virilans, but also about representing humanity in the most responsible way possible. Every action carried weight far beyond the walls of the ship. Tension grew further when the communications officer detected irregularities in the structure's energy fields. These were minor fluctuations easily overlooked, but they indicated that the Virilans were adjusting to the humans' presence in ways that were not fully understood. The crew could not tell if these adjustments were defensive, curious, or a form of caution. The ambiguity was unsettling. One evening, the captain gathered the crew on the observation deck. The Virilan structure shimmered in the distance, calm but alert. "We have achieved something remarkable," he said quietly. "We are in communication with another intelligent species. That is extraordinary. But we must remember, we are guests in their space. We cannot assume anything. We must continue to observe, to learn, and to respect their boundaries." The crew nodded in agreement, silently acknowledging the delicate position they occupied. Every decision mattered. Every signal sent could influence the future of humanity's first contact. They were explorers, diplomats, and witnesses, walking the thin line between wonder and danger. As the days passed, the anomalies continued sporadically. Sometimes a pulse would flicker unexpectedly, or the structure would emit a brief burst of energy that affected the ship's instruments. Each event reminded the crew that peace, however genuine, was fragile. They learned to respond with calm, to repeat sequences, and to wait for the Virilan's reply. Hasty reactions were avoided at all costs. Amid the growing tension, the crew also found moments of hope and beauty. They observed complex light patterns that seemed almost like music, subtle dances of energy that hinted at intelligence, creativity, and a form of expression unlike anything humans had seen. These moments reinforced the belief that understanding was possible even if it was difficult and slow. Yet despite these flashes of beauty, an undercurrent of unease persisted. The crew could sense that the universe they had entered was more complex and unpredictable than any mission plan could account for. The Virilans were not hostile, but they were cautious, and humans, with all their curiosity and ambition, could unintentionally provoke a response that might destroy the fragile trust that had been built. Back on Earth, military leaders continued their quiet preparations. The Dreadnought-class Helios Vanguard moved closer to the Varellan structure, hidden from view. Its presence was a precaution, they argued, but it introduced a hidden variable that could disrupt the delicate balance of the mission. For now, the humans aboard the Odyssey remained unaware, focused on understanding and learning. But the threads of tension were slowly weaving together, creating a situation that might one day challenge every lesson they had learned about patience, curiosity, and diplomacy. As the Odyssey drifted silently near the Varellan structure, the crew reflected. The calm that had stretched across the Odyssey and the Varellan structure began to feel thinner, like ice over deep water. Beautiful and strong, but fragile. The crew had grown used to observing the alien signals, to responding with patience, to feeling the subtle rhythms of a species unlike any other. Yet there was an unspoken tension aboard the ship. Something was changing beyond their immediate view. Unbeknownst to them, the United Earth Space Authority had quietly moved the Helios Vanguard closer to the Varellan structure. The Dreadnought was enormous, far larger than the Odyssey, designed for defense and, if necessary, offense. Its hull was built to withstand attacks that humans had not even encountered yet. But its presence was hidden. The Varellans had no knowledge of it, and the Odyssey crew remained focused on their careful diplomacy. The Dreadnought was supposed to be a precaution, a silent guardian. Yet in the delicate balance of this encounter, silence itself could be dangerous. The Helios Vanguard used the most advanced stealth technology ever created by humans. Its hull absorbed light and energy in such a way that it became almost invisible, undetectable by the Varellans' sensors. The crew aboard the Dreadnought monitored every pulse from the Odyssey, every energy fluctuation from the alien structure, and adjusted their orbit with extreme precision. Every movement was calculated to avoid detection, to ensure that Earth could intervene if something went wrong, but even the smallest miscalculation could reveal their presence. On the Odyssey, the crew continued their careful exchanges. Every day they sent pulses of light, sequences of mathematics and sounds through space, hoping to build a deeper understanding with the Varellans. Slowly, they were learning more about the aliens' perception of space, time, and energy. The Varellans responded with a rhythm that suggested curiosity and intelligence, but now, occasionally, their pulses were interrupted by faint anomalies. They hesitated more often, paused longer, as if sensing a presence they could not quite see. The captain of the Odyssey noticed these subtle changes. "There's something in their behavior that isn't quite right," he said during a briefing. "They're still calm, but their responses are more cautious than before. We need to continue observing carefully. Do not provoke them in any way." Crew redoubled their efforts. Every signal sent was repeated, measured, and analyzed. Even the smallest error could be misinterpreted. They practiced patience, learning to wait through long silences to interpret subtle shifts in the pulses of light, to recognize the faintest variations in tone. Communication had become a dance, delicate and deliberate, and every member of the crew understood that one wrong step could shatter the fragile connection. Meanwhile, the Helios Vanguard made its approach. It moved slowly, carefully, maintaining the stealth fields that rendered it almost invisible. Sensors aboard the Dreadnought detected subtle energy fluctuations from the Varellan structure, minor pulses that suggested the aliens were aware of something in their vicinity. The humans aboard the Dreadnought remained calm, trained for this kind of operation, but tension built quietly. Even with advanced technology, space was unpredictable, and the Varellans' response to an unseen ship could be catastrophic. As the Dreadnought settled into its orbit, a faint resonance began to ripple through space. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it traveled faster than human instruments could fully record. The Varellan structure pulsed briefly, a flash of light that seemed to ripple across the energy fields around it. The crew aboard the Odyssey noticed it instantly. "Did you see that?" the communications officer asked, eyes wide. "It wasn't like anything before. Something changed." The captain stared at the readings. "Something has disturbed them," he said quietly. "We need to stay calm and continue our signals. Observe, don't react, let's see what they do. Hours passed. The Odyssey continued its transmissions, sending greetings, sequences, and repeated patterns. The Virulons responded, but now, with longer pauses and flickers of energy that the crew could not fully interpret. It was as if the aliens were feeling the presence of the Dreadnought without knowing exactly what it was. Their pulses were defensive, cautious, and the humans aboard the Odyssey felt a quiet tension settle over the ship. The lead scientist studied the energy fields closely. "There's a resonance that we've never seen before," they said. "It's subtle, but it's significant. The Virulons are aware of something massive in the area. They're adjusting, reacting, trying to understand what it is. It's not aggression, not yet, but it's defensive." On the Helios Vanguard, the crew monitored the Virulons' response carefully. Every calculation, every adjustment of position was made with precision. Even a tiny movement could be detected by the aliens' advanced energy perception. The humans aboard the Dreadnought knew that if they were discovered prematurely, the delicate balance of peace might be lost. They had to remain invisible, yet ready. It was a tension unlike any they had experienced. Back on the Odyssey, the crew worked tirelessly to maintain contact and understanding. Every light pulse sent was a careful gesture of goodwill. Every pause in communication was deliberate. They had learned to wait, to watch, to interpret the subtle shifts in energy and rhythm. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet fear grew. Something massive was moving nearby. Something the Virulons could sense even if the humans on the Odyssey could not. As the hours stretched, the energy pulses from the Virulon structure became more pronounced, longer, and slightly more forceful. It was a warning of subtle power, a reminder that the humans were not alone in this part of space. The captain observed quietly, noting every change. "They are aware," he said. "We are testing the limits of their patience even if we don't realize it." The crew realized that they had to adjust their communication, slow down their signals, and focus even more carefully on understanding the Virulons' intentions. They could feel the invisible tension in the void, a delicate balance between curiosity and caution. Every gesture mattered. Every pulse mattered. Every pause mattered. Suddenly, a flash of energy traveled across the structure. It was brief, but intense enough to make instruments aboard the Odyssey flicker. Systems stabilized quickly, but the crew held their breath. They watched the energy patterns carefully, trying to interpret the message behind the pulse. It was not hostile, not aggressive, but it was firm. It was a boundary. The captain gathered the crew for an immediate briefing. "We've crossed a line without realizing it," he said. "The Virulons are still calm, but they are aware of something unusual. Our job now is to maintain peace, observe, and ensure that every action we take is deliberate and careful." The communications officer sent repeated sequences, slower and more deliberate than before, as a gesture of reassurance. The Virulons' pulses began to stabilize again, but the crew could sense that their awareness of the Dreadnought was growing. It was a silent presence, invisible, but influential. The aliens were adjusting their energy fields, subtly shifting, in response to something they could not fully see. Days passed with careful observation, and the crew began to understand the delicate dance they were part of. The Virulons were intelligent, cautious, and powerful in ways humans could barely comprehend. The humans were observers, ambassadors, and negotiators, all at once. They had to maintain patience, empathy, and humility. And yet, in the quiet tension of space, the Helios Vanguard remained a looming presence. Its massive hull, invisible to the Virulons, was a reminder that humanity had not come empty-handed. Defense was ready if diplomacy failed, but the very presence of the Dreadnought introduced risk. If the Virulons discovered it, the fragile trust the humans had built could collapse in an instant. Aboard the Odyssey, the crew reflected on the lessons of the past days. First contact was not just about curiosity or wonder. It was about patience, respect, and understanding the boundaries of another intelligence. Every gesture mattered. Every pulse mattered. Every moment of observation mattered. The universe was not silent, and intelligence, wherever it appeared, had its own rules. The captain looked out at the shimmering structure in the distance, light flickering in ways that hinted at thought, emotion, and intelligence. "We are in a delicate position," he said softly. "We have made progress, but we must never forget how fragile it is. One misstep, one misinterpreted signal, and everything could change." As the Odyssey drifted in the vast void, the crew understood a profound truth. Peace was fragile, curiosity was precious, and intelligence, no matter how benevolent, required respect. In that moment, the humans realized that they were not only observers of another species, but participants in a silent, careful dance. A dance that could shape the future of humanity itself. And far above, the Helios vanguard waited, unseen, but present, a silent guardian whose existence could either protect or shatter the fragile peace that had been so carefully nurtured. In the quiet darkness of space, all that remained was patience, observation, and hope. Hope that first contact could endure, and hope that humanity could rise to the challenge of understanding a universe far greater than itself. The calm aboard the Odyssey had been replaced by a quiet tension. The crew could feel it even if they did not fully understand why. Every pulse of light, every flicker of energy from the Virelon structure now carried a weight that had not been there before. The aliens were still calm, still cautious rather than hostile, but there was a difference. Their energy pulses were longer, more deliberate, almost like a warning. Something unseen had shifted the balance. Aboard the Helios vanguard, the crew monitored the situation with steady hands and sharp eyes. Every movement of the massive Dreadnought was calculated to remain invisible. Sensors were tuned to detect even the slightest reaction from the Virelons. Every adjustment in orbit, every minor energy fluctuation was carefully logged. The mission was clear: protect humanity if necessary, but avoid detection at all costs. But space is a delicate environment, and even the best technology can falter. A subtle resonance began to ripple through the area, something that humans had not predicted. It was a clash of energies, the stealth systems of the Helios vanguard interacting with the Virelon's energy fields. The resonance was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it traveled faster than human sensors could fully measure. The Virelons sensed it immediately. On the Odyssey, the communications officer noticed the anomaly first. "Captain, there's a fluctuation in the readings," they said, eyes wide. "Something is affecting their signals. I can't explain it, but it's not like anything we've seen before." The captain leaned over the console, scanning the data. "Stay calm," he said, though his own chest tightened. "Observe. Do not react. Let's see how they respond." For the next few minutes, nothing happened. Then suddenly, a massive pulse of energy erupted from the Virelon structure. It was not aimed directly at the Odyssey, but it was powerful enough to ripple through space, affecting the ship's instruments. Screens flickered, lights dimmed, and alarms rang softly before stabilizing. The crew held their breath, hearts pounding. The lead scientist studied the data frantically. "It's defensive," they said. "They're not attacking us, but they're aware of something massive nearby. They're adjusting their energy fields, responding to a presence we can't fully detect. It's the Dreadnought, the Helios vanguard. Our own forces are causing this reaction." The realization hit the captain hard. "We have triggered a defensive response," he said quietly. "We need to communicate immediately. Keep the signals calm and deliberate. No sudden changes. We cannot let this escalate." The crew worked quickly, sending repeated sequences of light and sound designed to reassure the Virelons. But the aliens' pulses were still strong, still deliberate, and the tension in the void grew heavier. The humans realized that they were walking a razor-thin line between observation and provocation. Hours passed. The Odyssey continued its careful communication, but now every pulse of light and sound was interpreted in the context of a massive, invisible presence nearby. The Virelons seemed to be responding to something larger than the humans on the ship. Their pulses were cautious, measured, and at times forceful, almost as if they were testing the boundaries of what they would tolerate. On the Helios vanguard, the crew monitored the situation with quiet intensity. They could see the subtle shifts in the Virulon's energy patterns and knew that the aliens were aware of their presence. The Dreadnought's stealth systems were functioning perfectly, but even invisibility could not hide the physical presence of a massive ship in space. The energy resonance between the two forms of technology created a ripple that the Virulons could detect, and it was beginning to affect their behavior. The tension reached a critical point when the Odyssey detected a sudden spike in energy from the Virulon structure. It was unlike anything the crew had seen before. A sharp, intense burst that lit up their instruments and caused a momentary distortion in space around the ship. The crew froze. Every system stabilized almost immediately, but the message was clear. The aliens had noticed something unusual and were responding in a way that humans could barely comprehend. The captain ordered immediate analysis. "We need to understand this before it escalates," he said. The science officer worked quickly, reviewing the patterns and comparing them with previous signals. "It's defensive, not aggressive," they said. "But the intensity, it's higher than anything we've seen. They're aware of the Dreadnought, and they're testing their boundaries. We need to proceed with extreme caution." Despite the calm instructions, fear crept quietly into the crew's thoughts. For weeks, they had been careful, measured, and patient, learning the rhythms of a species that operated on a level far beyond human understanding. Now, their own allies had inadvertently introduced a variable that could disrupt everything. The humans on the Odyssey were still diplomats and explorers, but the Helios Vanguard was a silent threat. Massive, invisible, and capable of immense destruction if anything went wrong. The captain addressed the crew, his voice steady but grave. "We are in a delicate situation," he said. "Our mission is diplomacy and understanding, but we are not in control of everything in this area. Our own defense systems, unseen by the Virulons, are affecting them. We must continue with patience, empathy, and extreme care. Every action matters." The crew redoubled their efforts. Signals were repeated slowly, carefully, designed to reassure the Virulons that the humans aboard the Odyssey meant no harm. Every light pulse, every tone, was deliberate. They maintained their rhythm, their patience, their focus on understanding. But beneath it all, an unspoken fear lingered. Any misstep could provoke a response that would escalate beyond their control. Then it happened. The Helios Vanguard, still invisible, adjusted its orbit slightly to maintain stability. The movement was small, calculated, intended to avoid detection, but the Virulons sensed it immediately. The resonance between the Dreadnought's stealth systems and their energy fields caused a disruption, a distortion in space that the aliens could perceive as a threat. A single energy pulse shot out from the Virulon structure. It was brilliant, blinding in intensity, aimed not at the Odyssey but at the space surrounding it. The humans aboard the Odyssey felt the ripple through their instruments. Screens flickered violently, lights dimmed, and the ship shook slightly as the energy passed through the area. Alarms blared softly. The crew froze, understanding instantly what had happened. "They've detected the Dreadnought," the communications officer said, voice tight. "They know something is here and they're responding defensively." Panic did not take hold, but tension filled the ship. The captain's orders were calm but firm. "Maintain communication. Do not react with aggression. Observe and respond with patience." The Odyssey continued to send careful sequences, repeating mathematical patterns, pulses, and tones designed to reassure the Virulons. Slowly, the intensity of the alien pulses began to subside, but the message had been received loud and clear. The humans had crossed an invisible boundary, and the Virulons were capable of responding with overwhelming power. In the silence that followed, the crew reflected on the delicate situation. First contact had been peaceful, fragile, and full of hope. But now the invisible presence of their own military ship had changed everything. Peace had not been broken by the aliens, but by fear and precaution from their own kind. Humanity had introduced a variable that the Virulons could perceive, and it had caused a defensive response. The captain stood on the observation deck, looking at the shimmering structure. Its pulses were calmer now, but there was a sense of wariness, a quiet reminder of the power that lay beneath the beauty. He thought of Earth, of the people who were watching and waiting, and realized that the lesson was clear. Understanding another species required not only curiosity and empathy, but also complete awareness of the consequences of human actions. The crew worked through the night, maintaining their careful communication. Every pulse of light and sound was deliberate, repeated, and measured. The Virelians responded slowly, cautiously, and the tension gradually eased. But the memory of the energy burst lingered in every mind aboard the ship. They had seen what defensive power looked like, and they understood that one mistake could escalate rapidly. As dawn approached over the distant stars, the captain spoke quietly to the crew. "We have learned an important lesson," he said. "Peace is fragile. Trust is easily disturbed. And even the best intentions can create consequences we do not fully understand. Our task is not finished, but we must move forward with caution, patience, and respect." The crew nodded, silently agreeing. They had entered a universe filled with wonder, intelligence, and possibility, but they now knew that the path forward would require not only courage and curiosity, but also restraint. First contact was not a single moment. It was an ongoing process, a careful dance of understanding that required humility, vigilance, and care. And somewhere beyond their sight, the Virelians watched, measured, and adapted. They were intelligent, powerful, and cautious. They had responded not with aggression but with clarity, and the humans aboard the Odyssey understood, perhaps for the first time, that the universe was far larger, more complex, and far more delicate than they had ever imagined. The silence after the Virelians' defensive pulse weighed heavily on the Odyssey. The crew moved through the ship with quiet determination, checking instruments, reviewing logs, and analyzing every detail of the recent event. They had survived, the first real demonstration of Virelian power, and now the challenge was to understand what it meant and how to move forward. The captain called an all-hands meeting in the central briefing room. The crew gathered around the glowing display, faces pale but focused. "We have learned something very important," he began. "First contact is not a single event. It is a process, one that requires patience, understanding, and respect. Today, we saw the consequences of actions we did not even intend to provoke. We have much to learn, and we must proceed carefully." The science officer nodded, scanning the most recent data. "The Virelians are intelligent, powerful, and cautious. Their response was defensive, not aggressive. They were not trying to harm us, but they made it clear that they can defend themselves. That is a message we must respect." The communications officer added, "We also saw that our signals, our intentions, can be misunderstood if there are other variables present. The presence of the Dreadnought, even invisible, altered their perception. It's a reminder that first contact is not just about what we say or do, but how it is interpreted." The crew absorbed the lesson in silence. They had always known that space exploration required careful planning and vigilance, but now they understood a deeper truth. Peace and understanding were fragile, and even the best intentions could create unintended consequences. The days that followed were quiet, but filled with reflection and careful observation. The Odyssey continued to maintain communication with the Virelians, but with even more deliberate patience. Signals were slower, sequences repeated, and every pause was measured. The crew had learned to observe the subtle changes in energy pulses, to recognize the Virelians' rhythms, and to respond with empathy rather than haste. On the observation deck, the captain watched the shimmering Virelian structure. Its light pulses had returned to a calm, deliberate rhythm, though the faint memory of the defensive burst lingered in the patterns. He reflected on the lessons of the mission so far. Humanity had reached out across the stars, seeking knowledge and connection, but the universe did not respond to force or haste. Understanding required humility, patience, and respect for beings who were unlike anything humans had encountered before. The crew also took time to reflect on their own experiences. They had been explorers, scientists, and diplomats, but they had also been witnesses to something extraordinary. The beauty and intelligence of the Virelians had opened their minds to new ways of thinking about the universe. Their careful dances of light and energy suggested creativity, communication, and a deep understanding of space and matter. Observing it was both inspiring and humbling. Back on Earth, the events of the past weeks had sparked intense discussion. Leaders debated the presence of the Helios Vanguard and the consequences of human interference. Scientists and diplomats emphasized the importance of patience and communication, while military planners reminded everyone of the need for caution. The incident had been a reminder that exploration, diplomacy, and defense were intertwined, and that even the most careful plans could have unexpected consequences. Aboard the Odyssey, the crew began developing new strategies for communication. They focused on building trust through repetition, consistency, and transparency. Mathematical sequences were refined, light pulses became more precise, and energy patterns were designed to reflect calm and intention. Every action was deliberate, aimed at demonstrating humanity's desire for understanding rather than dominance. The Virelans responded slowly, but consistently. Their pulses of light became predictable, their energy fields stable. It was a sign that the aliens were willing to continue the dialogue, despite the recent tension. The crew recognized this as a fragile success, a testament to the power of patience and careful observation. The captain gathered the crew once more. "We have achieved something remarkable," he said. "We survived the first test of our patience, and we are still in communication. The Virelans are cautious, but they are not hostile. That is a victory. But remember, this is just the beginning. Understanding another species is a lifelong process. We must remain humble, careful, and observant." Life aboard the Odyssey returned to a more routine rhythm, but the lessons of the past events were never forgotten. Crew members worked in teams, analyzing data, refining communication sequences, and observing the Virelans' subtle behaviors. They shared meals, told stories of Earth, and reflected on what it meant to represent humanity in such an unprecedented situation. The Virelans, too, seemed to continue their own patterns. The humans noticed that the aliens' pulses carried subtle variations, hints of curiosity and observation. Sometimes the light patterns would mimic the sequences sent by the Odyssey, as if the Virelans were experimenting with imitation as a form of understanding. Other times they introduced new sequences, entirely unfamiliar, challenging the humans to learn and adapt. It was a delicate dance, one that required empathy, patience, and continuous observation. The captain spent long hours on the observation deck, thinking about the broader implications of the mission. Humanity had always looked to the stars with curiosity and ambition, but now they faced the reality that intelligence beyond Earth existed. The Virelans were a reminder that the universe was vast, complex, and filled with possibilities. The encounter had humbled him, and he realized that the greatest achievement of the mission was not technology or exploration, but the willingness to understand and respect a species entirely different from their own. The crew began to see the importance of restraint. Even with advanced technology and vast knowledge, they understood that their actions had consequences. Each sequence of light, each energy pulse, each movement in space could alter perceptions and create unintended responses. They had learned that diplomacy in space required not only intelligence and curiosity, but also caution, empathy, and patience. As days turned into weeks, the bond between humans and the Virelans strengthened slowly. Communication became smoother, and the aliens' responses more consistent. It was still a fragile connection, built on careful observation and mutual respect, but it was real. Humanity had taken its first true steps into a wider universe, not with weapons or force, but with understanding and curiosity. The captain addressed the crew one final time before the Odyssey began its return to Earth. "We have achieved something extraordinary," he said. "First contact is not about dominance, control, or conquest. It is about curiosity, understanding, and respect. We have seen intelligence beyond our own, and we have learned that humility is as important as knowledge. We must carry these lessons home and share them with the world." The crew nodded, reflecting on the journey. They had faced tension, uncertainty, and fear, but they had also witnessed beauty, intelligence, and the possibility of connection. They had learned that the universe was not a place to dominate, but a place to understand, explore, and respect. As the Odyssey turned toward Earth, the crew observed the Virilan structure one last time. Its light pulses were calm, deliberate, and even carried a sense of acknowledgement. It was a silent farewell, a reminder that understanding was possible, but required patience and respect. The humans felt a deep sense of accomplishment, tempered by the knowledge that the universe was vast and full of challenges yet to come. Back on Earth, news of the mission's success spread slowly at first, then rapidly. People marveled at the intelligence and beauty of the Virilans, and at humanity's first steps toward understanding another species. Scientists celebrated the discoveries, diplomats praised the careful communication, and the world reflected on the lessons learned. Curiosity without respect could be dangerous, but empathy and patience could bridge the greatest divides. The crew of the Odyssey returned as heroes, not because they had conquered or defeated, but because they had represented humanity at its best, patient, curious, and willing to learn. They had faced the unknown, navigated tension and fear, and emerged with knowledge, understanding, and hope for the future. In quiet moments, the captain and crew would sometimes recall the defensive pulse, the ripple of energy that had reminded them of the power and intelligence of the Virilans. It was a memory that carried a lesson. The universe was alive, full of forces that humans could barely perceive, and intelligence required respect above all else. They had learned that first contact was not a moment but a journey, one that required courage, patience, and humility. And in that knowledge, there was hope. Hope that humans and Virilans might one day meet not only as observers, but as equals. Hope that the universe could be explored with respect and understanding, and hope that the delicate, fragile thread of first contact could grow into something lasting, a connection that spanned stars, species, and the infinite possibilities of space. As the Odyssey sailed home through the vast emptiness, the crew felt a sense of wonder that no experience on Earth could have provided. They had crossed a threshold, met another intelligence, and learned lessons that would shape humanity forever. And though the universe remained vast, mysterious, and full of challenges, they had proven that understanding